Tonight, Iran and Israel have both signaled they are de-escalating military operations after trading missile attacks in the past 24 hours. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has warned that attacks would resume if Israel continued to attack Lebanon. And the Israeli Prime Minister has also threatened to resume hostilities if Israel is attacked. A fragile ceasefire had been in place since April, and earlier Monday, U.S. President Donald Trump, who launched the war with Israel back in February, took to social media to ask Israel and Iran to stop attacking each other. Now, despite the pause in fighting, tensions remain high across the Middle East. We get the latest from Peter O'Brien.
After his call with Washington, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu put down the phone and went to address the public, confirming a ceasefire but also sending a warning.
If the terrorist regime acts again and returns to attack us, we will respond with full force.
In their first exchange of fire for 2 months, Israel said Iran launched about 30 missiles, and its air force responded by destroying Iranian defense systems and a petrochemical complex. A retaliation which openly defied orders from US President Donald Trump, who told both sides to hold fire and threatened to scupper his efforts for peace. Like Israel, the Iranian government warned that the halt in hostilities might only be temporary.
Everyone should be concerned about the possibility of the fire spreading further.
Yemen's Houthi rebels also launched a missile at Israel and threatened to disrupt Red Sea shipping. The tipping point for Iran was attacks on its ally Hezbollah in Beirut's southern suburbs. This Monday, Israel vowed to forge ahead with its campaign in Lebanon and continued to strike the south of the country. As for the peace negotiations, mediator Pakistan insisted it was close to being achieved and urged restraint on all sides.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Negah Angha, a visiting fellow at King's College London and a former senior advisor at the NSC under the Biden administration. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. You know, even with this apparent de-escalation, I think it's fair to say that we can't call the current state of affairs a ceasefire. So how do you read what's happening right now? Is the region back on the brink of a full-scale war?
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I think we're in a pause. We're not in a settlement, and we're not yet at a place where we can say we're at a full-scale war. I think, seeing that Israel and Iran have stepped back from their direct strikes after President Trump intervened, both sides have left the door open for renewed actions. Obviously, there is heightened tension across the board, but Iran has explicitly said it could restart attacks if Israel continues to strike Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there's been reporting suggesting that there is still fighting in southern Lebanon that continues to persist even after the so-called truce. So I would say, the crisis isn't necessarily over, but the center of gravity has shifted back to the Lebanon front and the overall diplomatic track.
You referenced the fact that Donald Trump intervened. Donald Trump says he calls the shots when it comes to this war in Iran. Does that appear to be true or not true from your perspective?
Well, first, I think, when he used the terms, I call the shots, I think some of that is partially negotiating theater. It's about Trump wanting to signal to Iran that he can deliver Israel if Tehran signs a deal. And that matters because Iran's core concerns are, they don't necessarily trust Washington, even if Washington signs that Israel will back down from its attacks. So Trump is trying to project a little bit of that command over the regional file in general, but the reality is a bit messier. That said, I think President Trump does have real leverage, not necessarily total control over Prime Minister Netanyahu and his actions, but my view is that Trump can influence the pace, the scale, and just the overall overall political boundaries of Israeli action, especially when Prime Minister Netanyahu needs Washington's backing. And I think, Trump's leverage over Israel is greater than his leverage over Iran. And so if a deal is within reach, he is likely to press Netanyahu harder. The only issue is that reporting today suggests that Israel is still willing to defy Trump tactically in some ways to sort of shape the end game according to the way Israel sees fit. So I think, in many ways, Trump can, help shape the next steps, but the options are quite narrow.
So what you're saying is, what I hear you saying is, Israel is defying Donald Trump in some sense by continuing to attack Lebanon and Iran. Is that what you're saying?
I think a lot of this is political theater. I think a lot of the parties involved are trying to gauge how far they can push, how far they can meld the end result. So in many ways, they are listening. Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to comply with what President Trump is asking him to seize on, but not fully.
I want to bring the Houthis into this discussion. The Houthi militia in Yemen, who are aligned with Iran, they fired several missiles at Israel today. Saudi Arabia said missiles from Yemen were headed in its direction. Well, in any rate, the Houthis are also threatening to attack ships in the Red Sea. We've seen that before. How could this factor into where you see this conflict going?
I mean, first and foremost, the Red Sea matters more when the Hormuz Strait is already in its constrained state. Obviously, the reality is the Houthis being influenced as one of the proxies is an interesting point. It's an interesting strategic point because Iran has continued to sort of call out this essentially stick in this carrot stick approach that they will, use the Red Sea outlet as one of their sticks if they feel that the situation continues to progress in a way where the Lebanon front isn't being attended to. And so essentially at this point, there is further escalation. And I think that is where the concern really lies, is how quickly this region will slide back into escalation. I think the Red Sea is even more important because it's the main alternative, again, for millions of barrels of oil that would normally move through the Hormuz and now moving through the Red Sea. And so if the Hormuz is the choke point that everyone watches, then the Red Sea essentially is going to become the second choke point. And that threat is going to be extremely consequential in how the next few days proceed.
Turning now to sort of the diplomatic piece of this, in your previous role in government, you advised the State Department, the NSC leadership. One thing we're hearing from foreign policy experts is that the U.S. simply doesn't have the diplomatic infrastructure to manage a crisis of this scale. Do you share those concerns?
I think it's an interesting point, and there's various different perspectives. I think, when we talk about diplomacy, we have to bear in mind that the U.S. diplomacy, U.S. national security is not just the State Department. There are multiple agencies that engage in that process, and the process that advises the president and his key negotiators. I think the question is, I think the apparatus is still there within the U.S. government. The question is how engaged the apparatus is with the U.S. negotiators, with President Trump. How much are they being listened to? So I think, again, the diplomatic sort of ins and outs of the United States still remain strong. It's just a matter of whether they're being listened to.
In his message on Truth Social, Donald Trump equated Israel and Iran in a way, saying that they should stop attacking each other. What does that say in a diplomatic sense, given that Israel is considered, a strong ally of the U.S.?
In many ways, what President Trump, again, is going back to it is sort of projecting that command. He is now sort of shedding a spotlight away from this being U.S. Iran and essentially saying, okay, well, Israel and Iran are fighting, and I'm going to sort of come in and mediate this conflict. So I think he does a very good job of sort of projecting sort of some sort of power or some sort of way of command over of the region. And so that's how I would read that sort of statement by him.
Just turning to the politics of this for a minute, really, there's no appetite from the American public if we look at the polls in terms of this war. The majority of people are against this continuing war with Iran. What does this portend for Donald Trump and the Republicans politically, especially with the midterms coming up in just a couple of months?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because President Trump is really trying to manage essentially three domestic pressures at once. First, obviously it's the voters. If gas prices rise and the war with Iran looks open-ended, then this becomes incredibly politically difficult very quickly, especially heading into the election cycle. The second one is Congress itself. The House vote to end the war may not necessarily force the hand of the president. The Senate still has to act, and any bill could be vetoed. But it does send a clear political signal that there is still growing discomfort with an undefined war with Iran. And third, there's the deal itself, right? Congress has not yet defined what a good Iran deal looks like, but senators have already made clear that they want to review whatever the deal is under the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act. And that was the Obama-era-led law that essentially gave Congress a formal role in reviewing any nuclear agreement with Iran. So I think Trump needs a deal he can sell strength and not necessarily retreat. In parallel, as a side note, at the same time, the U.S. and the Israeli negotiators are discussing a new model of security cooperation after the traditional military grant between the U.S. and Israel sunset. And so there is an anxiety both on the left and the right in terms of that deal, and it's being commingled in Congress right now. But the broader point is that President Trump is trying to turn a messy war into a politically usable win, by saying we're lowering gas prices, that, again, this is a claimed sort of restoring peace in the region, a tighter Iran framework than what there was under the Obama era, and just reassurances to Israel. But those goals don't naturally fit together, as you can imagine. And so the domestic politics at this point in time, where we are in the cycle, is not background noise. It is going to shape and impact diplomacy and how President Trump makes decisions.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Negah Angha, visiting fellow at King's College London and a former senior advisor at the NSC under the Biden administration. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. We appreciate it.